Yeah.
Are we ready? Okay, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Rami Ismail from Vlambeer company. And he will tell us about their indie success.
Yeah, I will also.
Let's welcome him.
Sorry I'm a bit late. It turns out that public transport in the city is quite difficult if you're not from the city and have no clue what this conference hall is at. So I'm a bit late. I hope you won't mind. To introduce myself, I'm Rami Ismail. I'm the business and development guy at a Dutch independent studio called Vlambeer. And I kind of had this talk in mind about, about why you should pay attention to like the indie business model, right? And as I was doing that, I kind of stumbled upon like what I think is happening right now in the industry. So I actually want to talk a bit about that. If you're expecting like hard numbers and stuff, please just barge in and ask me about it. But I just want to talk a bit about the road ahead, because if you look at the indie gaming scene, we've been lauded for a lot of things. We've seen beautiful games happen that are pushing the boundaries of what a game is, like Proteus, or games that look like Azure, as in the case of Antichamber, or games that are amazing in scope, like Cave Story, or games without screens. Should I point them at my face? Good. Games without screens, like Johann Sebastian Joust. But what we don't really talk about, and what is really important that is happening within the indie scene, is that we're also changing the way we do business. And to sort of explain what I mean, I'm going to quickly run through some of the ways I see business in the gaming industry. And I'm going to start with like the traditional business model. And this is sort of what you start with, right? You've got, you've got the developer who wants to put a game in the shop. And the way you do that is through any sort of platform or without a platform. Like the platform is sort of irrelevant in this old model. But what you need is you need to make a game, then put it on a disk or whatever, then put it in a box and then shop it. That's how our traditional business model was formed. It was formed because we needed the logistics to put games into stores. So you don't really have money to do that as a developer. So what you do is you get a publisher. And that is sort of like the traditional model. The developer needs a publisher to put the game on a platform to ship it. And that went pretty well for the publishers for a while, and for the platform holders, and for a lot of people. And it also did this thing where traditional competition kind of looks like this. It's like developers flock to publishers who, developers compete for publishers who compete for platforms who compete for consumers. This is what gaming business has looked like for a long, long time. And it worked because everything fell within a box. This is a game. We know what a game looks like. We know what a game does. We know how we ship it to people. We know what the platforms are. We know how this thing works. But nowadays, this model is getting sort of outdated. Because if you look at the market, the traditional way of selling games doesn't work anymore. We've got games like Team Fortress that are basically free to play. We have funding models that don't require a publisher to get a whole lot of money to ship your game or to make your game. And we've got games that don't even want a publisher because they can do it themselves. So let me ask you, of all the traditional platforms that we have, which one would allow any of these three games to exist? Well, it's basically none. Like the only one that did that was Steam, because it was their own game. I would probably allow my own game on my platform. So I'm going to take a step back and look at how Vlambeer started. Because how we got where we are isn't through Steam, and it isn't through Sony or Microsoft or anyone. It's through a really shitty website we made on which we put our game. And then people downloaded it, and they liked it, and they told people on Twitter and Facebook, and then more people downloaded it. Then we got bigger and bigger and bigger until we were winning awards and flying around the world and doing all sorts of crazy stuff, and we started to make money. That's how Vlambeer started. So we've got a few games upcoming. We've got a few new games coming up. We've made 14 games in the past 2.5 years, I think. Most of them were at least a moderate success. A lot of them were a pretty nice success. We're coming up with a game called Luftrausers, which is about shooting things before they shoot you. We've got a game called Ridiculous Fishing, which is a game about shooting fish. Shooting is a pretty common thing in our games, I guess. Explosions too. So who do we work with? Well, we work with Steam. And the reason we work with Steam is that besides they have the traditional sort of base deal, which is like 70 for us, 30 to them, they're also really open in what we're allowed to do. We can do crazy stuff. We've got this idea of having community missions that will trigger sales within, like, for the game. So if players around the world are doing really well, and they beat certain missions that people all around the world have to work on, we start a sale. We told Steam, they were like, yeah, whatever. We can't do that on any other platform besides Steam. Well, Apple maybe, but it's a PC game. We're working with Sony, and why are we working with Sony? Well, we're working with Sony because they came to us, said, well, here's a big bag of money, make a game for us. And then when we said yes, they were actually awesome. They were really fun to work with. When my Vita got stolen, when I was in England, I was attending, what was the name of the thing? There was a conference, Eurogamer, thank you. Eurogamer, I was at Eurogamer, and the PlayStation Vita on which I was showing our Super Crate Box version for Vita got stolen. And this was during the weekend, and then an employee of Sony actually drove out to bring me a new PlayStation Vita so I could continue showing the game. That's pretty awesome, so that's why we still work with Sony. Apple, what we really like about Apple is that if we make a game and EA makes a game, they're not treating us any different. Like, if we make a game and we're trying to put it in the market, and EA is bringing a game to the market, like, we're both fighting for that top spot, and it's pretty unsure who will get it. It's not like, well, EA is releasing games so they get like the top featured spot. We've beaten bigger games, like with Super Crate Box, we've beaten a few big games to that featured spot. And Apple is treating everyone like quite an equal level. And we're working with Ouya because, well, Ouya is a possible emerging thing. They've been nice, they've been reaching out to people. They're just nice people to talk to. And they're promising this open, equalized platform for on the TV, which is also awesome. And then we also work with these guys. They're pretty cool guys. They're us, so it's pretty easy to publish through them. They have a really good base deal. It's like 100% for us and 0% for anybody else. But those are the ways we work. And if you listen carefully, like, one thing that you haven't heard too much is money. We do give a lot about money. Steam has a good deal. It's like 70-30. Sony has a good deal. It's also 70-30. Apple has a good deal, which is also 70-30. Ouya has a good deal, which is also 70-30. But the reason we choose for them isn't that 70-30, because everybody is offering 70-30. If you're offering 60-40, I'm not going to work with you because I can get 70-30 anywhere else. The reason I work with these people is because they're flexible. So let's look at why that is. Because if you remember, like, from the start of the presentation, let me go really quick. This thing, well, we can agree that this doesn't work anymore, right? What it looks like now, what it looks like for me, when I wake up and think like, okay, how am I going to do this? This is what I think about. I'm on the left, and on the right is the consumer. I don't care about the platform because, frankly, most consumers don't really care. They want my games, that's all, because they care about Vlambeer. They don't care about whether Vlambeer is on Xbox or PlayStation. If they have the device, that's awesome. But they care about us. And that, like, our most powerful marketing tools aren't like through platforms or features or whatever. When we released Super Crate Box for iOS, we were the 24th best-selling game on iOS before Apple even noticed our game was out. Because everybody on Twitter was talking about it. Because even though we might have like 9,000 followers, which doesn't sound like that much, we've got a lot of friends that are also developers who also have 9,000 followers. And we have Notch, who also retweets us, who has like 70 billion followers. So that's also pretty useful. But like, our extended reach, our extended social network is huge. And we don't need the traditional marketing that a publisher could offer us because we can do it ourselves just through tweeting. If you look at our Twitter, you can pretty much tell which game is going to launch next. Because we've been talking about ridiculous fishing for like the past week. And the funny thing is we don't go to the press with that story. The press comes to us because they read on our Twitter that we're done with ridiculous fishing. That's the thing you're aiming for at this point. It isn't to make a publisher happy. It is to make your consumers interested in what you're doing. And talking about that, did you know that our marketing budget for the past 3 years has been $15? It's been $15. I've paid one thing for a marketing thing. It was like when we released our first game for Mac, when we ported Super Crate Box to Mac, we had no idea who to reach out to. So we had this, this marketing thing, PR Mac, really quite good service. What they do is they send press releases on your behalf to Mac sites. So we wrote an email in which we said, well, and if you want more information from us, just email us at rami@vlambeer.com. And then we never needed PR Mac again because people mailed us. So I spent $15 on PR Mac once. But then I still do crazy stuff like this, which are conventions, and I build booths. But I just make nice deals. So this one was actually mostly paid for by the guys who made the merchandise in exchange for like 20% extra on any sales on the merchandise during the show. So I actually didn't pay for this, but it was really nice to have like a big booth. But it's also indicative of how business has changed. It's not like I need to pay for everything. There are a lot of stakeholders related to Vlambeer. There are a lot of, well, stakeholders is the wrong word because it might have different connotations, but there are a lot of people that work with Vlambeer that want us to do well because if we do well, they do well. It's this mutual sort of cooperation where everybody gets better. And in that perspective, if you look at indie competition, that's a really interesting thing as well. Because there are a lot of gamers, and there are a lot of small developers, and you would think that all us indies are competing for the same market. But that's completely untrue, because there are so many gamers, and what we are doing is so different, because they're like usually rather personal games, that this is what it looks like. We're developers all reaching for our own small niche, for our own people, for the people that like our games. We make games for people that want our games. And the interesting thing is, instead of competing, we wonder whether we can do a bundle. Because together, like, we're small, but if we work together, we're big. And an idea like that just turns into the Humble Bundle. And the Humble Bundle, well, that makes a lot of money. Not enough to save THQ, but a lot of money anyway. So what changed is that publishers used to be a necessity. Publishers are no longer a necessity, they're a convenience. I'm not saying that publishers are over. I'm saying that they have to look at what they do and notice that the thing that they should be doing is making life easier for developers. Because we don't need publishers anymore. What we need is more time to make games because we really like making games. So if they want to do the business stuff for us or the marketing stuff for us, well, hey, sure. But, I mean, if you are going to tell us that we have to finish the game by that date, well, rather not, because I really care about my consumers and not so much about my publisher. So we've actually been working with a publisher. They're called Devolver Digital. There are a few guys from Austin. They're a bit weird, but I like them. What the deal with Devolver has always kind of been like, well, you know, you take care of all the console stuff, like you talk to Sony and Microsoft and all the other consoles, and you do some marketing stuff, and you make sure that we have like good spots at events, so I don't have to do that, so I can program a bit more. And then I actually really like talking to Sony, so I still talk to Sony myself instead of letting Devolver do that. And we got some like small deals going on with them. But the reason we do that is not, obviously, again, not because we need them, but because they're nice guys and we like working with them and they're kind of useful to us. And then the other thing that is really important is that platforms are starting to open up, and that's not a voluntary thing. They realize that they need to. Because traditionally, like, the reason people like the Xbox and the PlayStation and consoles and the App Store is because those are easy platforms. They're easy to use. They're easy to set up. You don't need any technical skills. It's not Linux or even Windows, which is too complex for some, like most people actually. But soon, every device is easy for consumers. If you look at like the Ouya, that's like an Android device, which is not known for being user-friendly. But if you look at the way you can download games on Ouya, that's easy. If you look at the PC, it was never easy to buy games from all sorts of places. But nowadays, we've got Steam. And if you don't use Steam, you can even use the Humble bundle, like the Humble Shop, which is a really easy widget for developers to set up. And it's like really easy for consumers to use. So they need to open up. They need to allow more things because indie developers don't fit within the box. They kind of push against it. And they need to allow this wider spectrum of content onto their platform. And we've seen people try. We've seen Greenlight. Greenlight was pretty interesting. I think it was a pretty bad thing. But what was interesting is that Steam was actually trying to make the curation more democratic. And they failed, and they admitted they failed, but they didn't fail because democracy doesn't work. They failed because they weren't radical enough. What they understand now, and I mean, I only understood this when they explained it, is what they need to be doing is they need to be making Steam more open. They don't need to have a Steam. They need to have Steam as like a big thing that developers can use, a store that I can use to sell my games, or somebody who has a sort of oversight over the indie scene, a curator of sorts, to create their Steam. And doing that will allow for a breadth of new content on Steam that hasn't been there before, and it will allow Steam to make a shit ton of money, which is pretty good for Steam, I guess. So if we look at the next generation of things, there are a few things to note for indie developers. A, our audiences are larger. More and more people are looking at indie games as this serious part of gaming, well, where 5 years ago, nobody gave a shit about indie because they were the pretentious, artsy, hipster games. Nowadays, they're just like, they're part of gaming. Indie is part of gaming. There's no way to remove indie from gaming at this point because it is so easy for developers to release their games that the games that are good or are marketed well will rise to well, tremendous heights. If you look at Antichamber, which released last week, that was at the top of the Steam charts, like the top 5 for the last week, which would probably translate to, I'd pretty much estimate that he would have made $1 million, probably more, in like 6 days, 5 days, 7 days, something like that. The audience isn't that small anymore. We're not talking about like tiny niches. We're talking about a whole group of gamers that is willing to buy into more interesting, more experimental, more different games. And that's the other thing. The audience are diversifying. Where it used to be, well, it didn't used to be, but like where the idea was that we needed to target teenage boys, we now realize that the market is far beyond that. And within indie, it's actually because, I mean, we already realized that from the casual market, right? Like the casual market isn't targeted at teenage boys. But if you look at the indie scene at this point, you're seeing an increasingly diverse set of games. You're seeing games about transphobia, you're seeing games about violence, you see big games about platforming. There's like all sorts of stuff. We're reaching towards more mature audiences, towards more serious audiences. We're trying to reach more artistic audiences. There is a lot more going on. And a lot of these games wouldn't be allowed on the traditional models. On the other hand, we've got more developers. We've got more smaller developers trying to make more games, which is, I guess, a bit of a problem, but then also super great. I mean, I love having more developers because the more developers we have, the more people we can reach. The more people we can reach, the better it is for indie gaming. And the developers are more diverse as well. I mean, I've met a guy who always wears a top hat and smokes like a traditional old pipe, and he makes games about being stood up for dinner, for a date. And it's a really interesting game. It's called Dinner Date. If you haven't played it, you probably should. But, I mean, that's a developer. And then I meet guys that wear pink suits and sleep in the trunk of a car that make games that earn $1 million. That's also an indie developer. But the thing I'm getting at is that developers have multiple solutions to every obstacle. We don't need one solution anymore. We don't really need anything at this point. We just need to make games and put them out. And we can put them out in a whole lot of ways. But the thing we do is we don't choose for money necessarily. Like, obviously we want to make money. We choose for convenience and income. It's a return on investment thing. It's how much time, how much effort do we have to put into this to make money? And the way that will be in the future is the path of least resistance. It's where we can put our games out easiest. It's a place where we can iterate on our games. It's a place where we can do whatever crazy idea we have, whether it's sales after we reach certain goals with our community, or making people buy a beta game. It sounds crazy, but like that is what we need to have in the future. We don't need stronger, better, faster platforms. We need more flexible platforms. Thank you. I have a really high hand right there. Yeah, go.
Hi.
Hi.
Just a minute ago, when you were saying how it's good to have more developers, you were kind of wincing and said, maybe it's not good. Can you mention the negative sides?
So one of the things that you do see is that if you look at Android, for example, as a market, that's a completely uncurated market. And if you look at that, it's really hard for a lot of developers to get any sort of traction right there. And that's an issue that we're still dealing with as a scene. I mean, there are a lot of developers, but if you look at iOS, for example, for every game that is successful on iOS, for every super crate box you have 3,000, 4,000 games that are making $300 a year. Right. That's an issue, because that means that a lot of people that might be actually making good games do not get the attention. And one of the ways I've been trying to deal with that is by creating this tool to allow small developers to also do more marketing. It's something called Do Prescott. You can download it at doprescott.com. It's free. But it's more of a discoverability issue than it is an economical issue. It's just that there is so much stuff happening that it's hard to keep track of what's what. And until we find a proper solution for that, like having more developers is always a good thing, like I said. It's just that it might be hard for the newer developers. And I think that is sort of problematic until we like fix that for them.
It kind of sounds, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're hinting at the fact that what you see as disadvantages is the fact that the market is very top-heavy. Like
it is very top-heavy, and that is a good thing for me because Vlambeer has been doing well. But I don't think it needs to be just that way. Like I said, the thing that Steam is doing is really interesting because they're allowing people to have different stores. And if you look at recent internet initiatives, you have free indie games, freeindiegum.es, which is a website maintained by an indie in England, actually not from England, but in England. And he just lists like interesting free small games. If there was a store for something like that, for like smaller experimental games, that would solve that issue as well, because the people that are looking for it will get it. Like, I think it's, like I said, it's really a discoverability issue more than it is an economical issue. So we just need somebody to step up there and create something that allows us to get to those games.
Thanks.
Hi. Thanks for the talk, first of all. Do you have any advice for people who are starting out as an indie developer? Because, just like you said, discoverability, and when you don't have influence on Twitter or you don't have budget for marketing, etc., what are the things that we should start doing to build up that influence and more exposure?
So indie game developers get popular for a number of reasons. Your products have to be good, but that's like a completely useless thing to say. The other thing is you need to have a personality to you. I think that's the most important thing. Like I said, it's like the direct link between this is what you need to be focusing on. It's the thing where where consumers have to care about you more than they care about like anything else. And if you look at the way Notch did that, people primarily love Minecraft, but he connected his online persona of Notch to that game in such a staggering amount that he is like the bigger, like he's almost like the bigger thing of the two. It's like not quite, but he is so, he got so big in relation to Minecraft that that anything he says is like almost religious to some people. The way we did that, I mean, we started out at some point as well, right? I mean, me and JW, we ate noodles for like 3 months before we earned any money in the first place. And we had no followers at the start, but we just started talking to people. We just started sort of venting, and we created this sort of persona in which we just kind of play, well, basically the Vlambeer persona. We're sort of crazy people that make a lot of games. And people like that, and people want to connect to that, and they want to know what we're up to. They want to know that I'm traveling to this place, and then that place, and then another place. They want to know that JW is playing crazy songs again or annoying me at the office. Like, it's sort of weird, but that is like what we are. We're crazy people making games. And communicating sort of a persona, sort of a personality to you, more than, hi, we make games. I think that is like one of the most important things. And the other thing that you have to do is you have to be quite serious about your marketing. Because like you said, like discoverability is a really big issue. But if you can get a bit of traction going and you look at media as something that is easy to reach from the bottom, like you don't go to Kotaku or Polygon to start your marketing. If you're new and you have no influence in the game industry, you start at like indiegames.com because they're interested in you. And if you can get on indiegames.com, like the other sites will notice. If your game is good, the other sites will notice. If your story is good, the other sites will notice. But if you want to know more about the marketing side of things, I recommend you check out DoPrescott, which is free, doprescott.com. Like, I have a few files there that talk a lot about the way I look at marketing. Might be interesting for you.
Great, thanks. Any questions?
Oh, that guy. Oh, God.
Hi.
Can we remove him from the hall, please?
I can ask you later if you prefer.
No,
I was just
bring
wondering, I had kind of the same question last night when we were talking about it.
I don't remember anything of last night.
You're talking about cutting out publishers, but then you talk about people will make personalized stores. So I'm just imagining Notch is going to open a store of games that he likes. Doesn't he then just become a publisher again?
So no, actually what is really interesting, have you read the story that he is the one funding Age of Wonders 3?
He's funding what, sorry?
Age of Wonders 3. It's a Dutch game. Age of Wonders 2 is like pretty old, but he loves that game, so he put a lot of money into Age of Wonders 3. He doesn't become into a publisher because he really doesn't care about being a publisher. He just wants fun games and he has the money. I mean, similarly, he once flew a private jet to the Netherlands to pick me and JW and Paul up to go to Stockholm. He's not doing that because he wants to be a store. He's doing that because he wants that game. Obviously, yeah, he has more influence in like what games happen or don't happen, but he doesn't care about influence on the games. And that's like the big difference. That's where publishers need to be going. They should be moving away from trying to have creative control over the projects and towards being a convenience for the developers. I think Notch understands that pretty well.
We don't have any time for more questions, but thank you very much for the session.
Most welcome.
And you can ask questions, Rami, after presentation.